In a spacious house on the outskirts of the suburbs, police found two bodies, the wife of a respected businessman and their 12-year-old daughter. Blood stains were caked on the floor, and the room looked torn apart. The brutality of the crime seemed at odds with the family's tranquil life. The morning in the suburbs began quietly. Neighbors were rushing about their errands. Children were heading to school. Only the Harper family's house stood out in a strange silence. Sarah usually walked her dog at dawn, but no one had seen her. Around midday, the woman's brother, worried about the lack of phone calls, drove up to the house. No one answered the knock, and the door was locked from the inside. After several attempts to contact his sister, he called the police. The patrol arrived 20 minutes later. Upon opening the door, the officers immediately smelled a strong odor. In the living room, they discovered Sarah's body. She was lying on her side, with a large amount of blood around her. Across the room was her 12-year-old daughter. The child's position and injuries clearly indicated a violent death. There were signs of a struggle in the room: an overturned table, a broken vase, and a pushed-over sofa. However, the rest of the room was undisturbed. Forensic experts arrived within an hour and began collecting evidence. Shoe prints of varying sizes were found on the floor, and partial fingerprints were found on the furniture. Of particular interest were two glasses with wine residue on the kitchen table. Investigators theorized that Sarah had met someone she knew before her death. The front door locks were intact, meaning the killer either had keys or was invited. Neighbors were questioned on the very first day. Several people claimed to have heard loud voices and a single loud bang late in the evening. No one paid any attention, dismissing it as a family quarrel. There were few surveillance cameras on the street, but one captured a car parked near the house around 10 p.m. The driver's identity was not immediately established. Meanwhile, the head of the family was outside the house. He later reported that he had been at work all evening. His colleagues confirmed that he had indeed been at the office, but the exact time he left was questionable. He arrived at the crime scene after the police had called. Investigators noted his condition. He appeared shaken, but his words were fragmentary, and some details were inconsistent. Establishing the time of death became a crucial task. The forensic expert provided preliminary information. The murder occurred between 9 o'clock and 10 p.m. This time frame coincided with the businessman's expected time to leave the office. The investigation immediately noted this detail. The police meticulously documented the situation. They collected blood samples, fingerprints, electronic devices, and footage from nearby security cameras. Every item was meticulously documented. The cell phones of the wife and daughter, found in the bedroom, were considered especially important. Recent calls and messages promised to yield additional information. By evening, journalists had gathered around the house. News of the double murder quickly spread throughout the city. Reporters wrote about the shocking tragedy in a prosperous neighborhood and emphasized the family status. Neighbors in interviews described the deceased as a friendly and caring woman, and the girl as a quiet, modest schoolgirl. The police held their first press conference that same day. A spokesperson confirmed the deaths of two people and said the investigation was considering all possible theories: robbery, a chance encounter with the perpetrator, or the actions of someone close to the perpetrator. It was emphasized that there are currently no suspects, and the investigation has only just begun. By the end of the first 24 hours, investigators had more questions than answers. Too many details didn't add up. The house didn't look robbed, but signs of struggle were obvious. Two glasses in the kitchen and intact locks pointed to a familiar guest. Finally, discrepancies in the husband's testimony immediately made him a figure to be closely watched. Richard Harper, the head of the family, had long held a strong position in the city's business community. He owned a mid-sized construction company that worked on both private clients and municipal projects. His name was frequently mentioned in local newspapers for his charitable work. Harper donated to school programs and sponsored sports teams. To most area residents, he was seen as a respectable and reliable man. Sarah Harper, his wife, was not involved in her husband's business, focusing on her family. She managed the household, cared for her daughter, and was actively involved in school and community events. According to acquaintances, Sarah had a calm personality, avoided conflict, and was open to communication. She was often seen at parent-teacher conferences, charity fairs, and her daughter's sports games. Emily, their daughter, was in 6th grade and considered a bright student. Teachers described her as quiet, attentive, and diligent. She enjoyed drawing and attended art classes. Family friends recalled that Emily disliked noisy groups, preferring to spend time at home or with close friends. The family lived in a 2-story house in a prosperous neighborhood. The house boasted well-maintained grounds and was equipped with modern security systems. However, the alarm was not activated on the day of the murder. This fact later became one of the investigators' arguments when developing their theories about the incident. At first glance, the family appeared prosperous. But upon closer examination, investigators began to uncover signs of hidden problems. There were rumors within the Harper family that the relationship between the spouses had recently become strained. Several acquaintances mentioned that Richard was increasingly working late at work and spending less time at home. Sarah, according to friends, took this painfully and complained of her husband's distance. The family's financial situation drew additional attention. Despite their apparent prosperity, it emerged that Harper's company was going through a difficult period. Several contracts had been canceled, and the firm had accumulated debt to banks. These circumstances called into question the sustainability of the business and could have led to stress in his personal life. Investigators interviewed the family's closest friends. Most described Richard as reserved and reasonable, but noted his tendency to keep everything under control. Sarah, by contrast, was perceived as open and trusting. One neighbor noted hearing loud conversations coming from the house in recent months, something that had never happened before. This evidence wasn't direct proof, but it added to the overall picture. Particular attention was paid to the couple's social circle. Sarah had several close friends, but none reported any suspicious contacts. Richard, however, as an entrepreneur, had numerous business connections, including controversial ones. Several company employees admitted that he negotiated with partners with whom he could not be considered trusting. The second line of investigation concerned the family's finances. Investigators requested bank statements and discovered large transfers to Richard's personal accounts. Some of these funds were not reflected in the company's official financial statements. The origin of the money and its use became one of the main focuses of the investigation. For the public, the family remained a symbol of stability. Newspapers published photographs of Sarah and Emily at city events, emphasizing that the tragedy had occurred in a perfect family. This contrast between the public image and the internal problems only intensified attention to the case. By the end of the first week of the investigation, investigators had formed a conclusion. The Harper family appeared to be well off, but hidden tensions in their relationships and financial difficulties could have been factors in the tragedy. The question was whether these circumstances were directly related to the murder or merely a backdrop. Immediately after the bodies were discovered, police began formulating a line of investigation. The first step was questioning Richard Harper. He claimed to have been in the office until late on the day of the murder and left around 11 a.m. He claimed he learned of the tragedy only after receiving a call from the police. Investigators verified this information. Colleagues confirmed that Harper had indeed been at work that evening, but one employee stated that he left his office for an extended period around 10 p.m. Office surveillance cameras recorded Richard leaving through a side exit at approximately 9:15 p.m. and returning only an hour later. This time frame matched the forensic estimates of Sarah and Emily's deaths. Harper's alibi proved incomplete. He couldn't accurately describe his whereabouts during that hour. Initially, he claimed to be traveling on company business, later mentioning a meeting with a potential client. But an investigation revealed he had no business meetings during that time. The inconsistency in his statements immediately raised suspicions. Investigators examined his phone records. The analysis revealed that during the specified period, his mobile phone was located in the area near his home. This fact sharply contradicted his claims of being in the office. The businessman's behavior during the identification of the bodies raised additional doubts. According to forensic experts, his reaction appeared restrained, lacking any apparent emotional response. While this in itself was not evidence, the investigation noted it. A series of witness interviews were conducted. Neighbors who had heard loud noises coming from the house that evening reported hearing screams and the sounds of a struggle around 10 a.m. These accounts matched the medical records of the time of death. One neighbor also reported seeing a car similar to Harper's driving down the street around the same time. Forensic experts processed evidence found in the house. Fingerprints matching Sarah's and the unknown man's were found on wine glasses in the kitchen. Subsequent examination revealed that some of the prints could have belonged to Richard himself. Furthermore, shoe prints on the living room floor matched the size of the shoes seized from him. Despite this information, there was still no direct evidence of guilt. The investigation continued to consider alternative theories, a possible visit from an outsider or a conflict with someone close to him. However, each new clarification of Harper's testimony only strengthened suspicions. By the end of the second week of the investigation, the police had formulated a preliminary position. The businessman's claim that he had been at work all evening was unsupported. Inconsistencies in his testimony, forensic evidence, and eyewitness accounts increasingly pointed to the need for a more thorough investigation into his role in the incident. After discrepancies were discovered in Richard Harper's testimony, the investigation focused on collecting and verifying evidence. Forensic examinations became a key tool in establishing the true picture of events. The first object of analysis was the biological traces found at the crime scene. Traces of blood were found in the living room, some of which belonged to Sarah and Emily. However, forensic scientists discovered small blood stains of a different origin. Later, an examination revealed a match to Richard's DNA, although he was unable to explain the origin of these traces. Shoe prints found near the bodies matched the size and sole pattern of one of the pairs of shoes seized from Harper. He claimed he hadn't worn them on the day of the tragedy, but forensic evidence indicated fresh dirt and blood on the soles. This provided indirect evidence of his presence in the house that evening. The investigation paid special attention to electronic devices. Harper's phone was picked up by cell phone towers in the area around his home during a key time period. This information contradicted his claims of going to a meeting. Moreover, digital forensics experts recovered deleted messages from the phone. One contained a conversation with an unknown contact several days before the murder, discussing family difficulties and the need for drastic decisions. The company's financial records also came under scrutiny by investigators. A review of bank accounts revealed large transfers between personal and corporate accounts. Investigators determined that the company was in crisis. Debts to creditors and threats of lawsuits were increasing pressure on Harper. This was considered a possible motive. A key element of the investigation was the testimony of company employees. Several workers reported that shortly before the tragedy, Harper had been irritated and withdrawn. He frequently mentioned family problems and hinted at conflicts with his wife over finances. This information matched information received from Sarah's friend, who said that the woman had planned a serious conversation with her husband about the family's future. Investigators were simultaneously exploring the possibility of outside interference. The fingerprints found in the house, with the exception of the family, belonged only to guests who had been there previously. No signs of forced entry or forced entry were found. The alarm system in the house was indeed not activated on the day of the murder, ruling out an accidental break-in. At press conferences, police emphasized that the investigation was being pursued in all directions, but journalists and the public increasingly linked the case to the businessman himself. Media reports focused on his contradictory statements and suspicious coincidences in the evidence. By the end of the month, investigators had accumulated a wealth of circumstantial evidence: DNA, shoe prints, cell phone data, financial issues, and the testimony of acquaintances. All of this formed a coherent line of evidence linking Harper to the murder of his wife and daughter. However, direct evidence, such as CCTV footage or a confession, was still lacking. Investigators were preparing for the next stage, formal indictment, hoping that the collected evidence would be sufficient for trial. Richard Harper was formally charged 6 weeks after the murder. Prosecutors cited a combination of evidence: bloodstains, matching shoe prints, cell phone records, and contradictory statements. His arrest sparked widespread controversy, with the city discussing how a respected businessman ended up at the center of such a serious crime. The trial began a year after the tragedy. At the first hearing, Harper's lawyers declared his innocence. Their defense argued that the evidence was circumstantial, and the lack of direct evidence prevented them from definitively linking him to the crime. The lawyers emphasized that some of the fingerprints in the house could have been left at any time, since he lived there, and they attributed the bloodstains to minor cuts. The prosecution, by contrast, presented a consistent case. Prosecutors emphasized time periods that Harper couldn't convincingly explain. Cell phone data was presented showing his presence near the house at the time of the murder. Forensic experts read their reports, matching the shoe prints and blood stains found on the floor. Witness testimony proved crucial. Colleagues describe Harper leaving the office at 9 p.m. on the day of the tragedy, despite his claims to the contrary. Neighbors reported hearing screams coming from the house around the same time. Sarah's friend confirmed that she had shared plans to talk to her husband about divorce and financial problems. For the prosecution, these statements supported a possible motive. The defense tried to soften the impression by portraying Harper as a victim of pressure from the investigation and the media. They argued that he had no reason to take the lives of his wife and daughter, as the divorce did not directly threaten his business. They pointed to the absence of the murder weapon among the items seized. The trial lasted several months. The press covered each hearing in detail, and public attention remained high. At the final stage, both parties made their presentations to the jury. Prosecutors insisted that the totality of the evidence ruled out chance, and the defense was based on assumptions. The defense insisted on the presumption of innocence and the need for direct evidence. After 3 days of deliberations, the jury returned a verdict: guilty on 2 counts of murder. The court sentenced Richard Harper to life imprisonment without parole. The decision elicited mixed reactions. Some considered the verdict fair, while others questioned whether the circumstantial evidence was sufficiently convincing. But legally, the case was closed. For the city, this trial was one of the most high-profile in a decade. The media summed it up: the deaths of Sarah and Emily, the investigation, and the trial changed public perceptions of well-being and safety, even in the most peaceful neighborhoods. The Harper family story ended with a resounding verdict. The murder, investigation, and trial became the subject of public debate, leaving behind many unanswered questions. The tragedy demonstrated that even a seemingly happy facade can conceal profound conflicts.